Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. Today we're going to take a look at a new handheld. This is the Mangmi Pocket Max. This handheld is a unique mix of high-end and affordability. It's got a really nice screen on it, 7 inches, AMOLED 144Hz, but it has a weaker and older chipset inside, the Snapdragon 865, same that we saw in the Retroid Pocket 5. And while this chip is no slouch when it comes to emulation, which we'll test in this video, I think it's more geared towards streaming. And in that way, it takes advantage of all those things that are great on Android. Long battery life, a lighter weight, and then we've also got some pretty full-size controls too. There are better streaming devices out there, but they're going to cost a lot more than this one, which starts at around $200 during its pre-order campaign. So grab your favorite snack and drink and let's jump into this deep dive review. Alright, as always, we're going to start with the specs and then talk about the price. So number one, the CPU is the Snapdragon 865, like I mentioned before. There's only going to be one version of this handheld. It's got 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage, and you can always expand that with a microSD card slot. We've got some great display specs. AMOLED 7 inches, 1080p with 144Hz refresh rate. It's also got a big battery in it too, 8,000 milliamp hours. I've done some battery testing over the past few days, and here is the range that you can expect. The very best case scenarios when playing a very lightweight game in RetroArch, I got around 16.5 hours of overall gameplay. I also tested some PC game streaming at 144Hz refresh rate, and this got me a little bit over 8 hours of gameplay, which is great. Even when pushing it pretty hard in emulation with God of War 2 on PS2 at a 2x resolution upscale, I got a little bit over 5.5 hours of battery life there. And then finally, the worst case scenario, the way that I could push the battery the most, was by turning on a benchmark, Wildlife Extreme, and then just running this over and over again. And it lasted a little bit under 5 hours altogether. So in general, I think that this is going to be great for battery. It's worth noting that they say it gets a 27 watt fast charge, but in my testing with various chargers and cables, the best I ever got was a little bit under 19 watts, and this is with the battery at under 50%. So there might be a moment where it does charge at 27 watts, but more consistently I found it between 18 and 19. As far as weight, we're looking at 437 grams, or a little bit under a pound. This makes it one of the lighter 7-inch devices that I've seen before. In fact, it's a little bit lighter than the Odin 2 Portal, which is at 441, and it's also surprisingly lighter than the Logitech G Cloud, which only has a 6,000 milliamp hour battery. It's about 40 grams lighter than the AYANEO Pocket Evo, which has almost an identical display between the two, and then finally, it's over 200 grams lighter than the Steam Deck OLED. As far as connectivity, the specs are a little bit older because of this chipset, so it's got Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.1. I would have loved to have seen Wi-Fi 7 on this for those who really want to get the fastest speeds. Of note, the USB-C port is capable of video out, and it worked absolutely fine when connecting it to my monitor, and it would charge it at the same time too. Within the device settings, you've got a bunch of different resolution and refresh rate options all the way up to 4K 60. Like with other handhelds with the Snapdragon 865 chip inside, this one has an older version of Android. It's running Android 13. But it also has some bells and whistles like TMR joysticks, which are low powered but also reduce any sort of stick drift, and then finally Hall effect triggers too. One unique thing about this handheld is it has modular controls for the D-pad and the face buttons. Now, you can't change the actual position of them, but you can change the type. So it'll come by default with rubber membrane controls, but you can also order mechanical micro switches too if you'd like something more clicky. I've got both for testing, so we will touch on this later. Now, this is the second handheld from this company. The first one was called the Air X. It came out last year. This is a smaller device, 5.5-inch screen, but this one was really good bang for your buck. The early bird pricing for this one was around $80, and even now that it's at retail price of $100, it's still one of the best handhelds you can get around this price point. The pricing for the Pocket Max is quite a bit more. It's about double, so super early bird price is going to be $199. It goes on sale starting later today, and it'll have that price for about a week. After that, it'll go into early bird pricing for $220. I'm not really sure how long that's going to last. What I do know is that the final retail price of this handheld is expected to be $240. So there's quite a big spread between the pre-order price and what it'll look like for retail sometime later this year. Now, given the fact that their first handheld had a bit of a disruptive price point to it, I was kind of expecting the same with this. I personally was projecting it to be around $180. I thought that would be a really good selling point there. $200 is a little steep for me, and once it gets into retail, that gets pretty bad, because at that point, you can buy devices like the Retroid Pocket 6 for around the same price, but get much better performance. We'll talk more about price near the end of the video, but I think that around $200 is about right for this handheld, but I was still hoping it would be a little bit cheaper. On one hand, it is a very good price compared to the competition. For example, the AYANEO Pocket Evo. This one starts at $500 right now, even though it does have a better processor, but you can't actually even buy the $500 model. It's not even in stock. So you have to go up to the $600 model if you wanted to get this device. So this device costs 3 times more than the Mangmi Pocket Max. And when I look at it from that perspective, then yes, I can see where it fits into everything, where it's a cheaper version of these higher end handhelds. After all, Logitech has their own streaming handheld. It's been out for several years at this point. They are still charging $300 for this thing. It is a 7-inch device, but it's LCD, goes up to 60 Hertz, and it's not the best panel either. And the processor on this thing is much less powerful and also has controls that have quite a few issues. And so again, from this perspective, I can see why the handheld we're looking at today is a better deal than these other options. At the same time, as of making this recording, AYN is having a sale on their Odin 2 portal, and the base model, which has 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage, is down to $249 before shipping. This one has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, about 3 times more powerful than the 865 in the handheld that we're reviewing today. So if you're looking for something that has power and size, then the Odin 2 portal is definitely worth that additional $50 if you ask me. Once this handheld goes back to its retail price of $330, then I think it'll be a different story, but at least as I'm making this video right now, this one I would say is the better deal. So putting it all together, I think that $200 is a fair price, but I wish it was a little bit cheaper, and once it gets up to $220 and $240, that makes a little bit less sense to me. It really depends on what you are looking for. If you want a larger handheld with a 7-inch screen that's AMOLED and 144 Hz, then this is easily your cheapest option. Okay, let's take a look inside of this box. Now, there's a lot of speculation about this company. A lot of people think that they might be like a partner company to AYANEO, and I think that this device in particular really feels like that. It's got modular controls, and the only other company to do that is AYANEO, and even the design of their box looks very similar to that as well. Of note, this is a review unit sent over by the company, but like with all my videos, all opinions are my own, no money was exchanged in any way, and they're not going to see this video ahead of time. Even the design inside of the box is very AYANEO. They've got this foam padding around it, and then underneath you can see that they have little boxes for your manual and cable, and that's about it. They also sent over one of their tempered glass screen protectors. I have not used this one in particular just because I don't want to add additional glass to this all glass front here, but if you are looking to protect your device, they are going to sell this too. And first impression here is that the device is quite large and very much so reminds me of an AYANEO device, especially these analog sticks, which I feel like are identical to the AYANEO Pocket Evo. This is 100% what I would classify as a couch handheld, something that you could just kind of lay around and play wherever, but I wouldn't want to take this out and about all the time. I think it is still travel friendly, but I would need to have a case for it, and they sent one over for me to test out too. This one I think is around $10, and it's padded, everything works pretty well. It's just a standard case. It does add some bulk to everything, but this is the kind of thing that I would throw in my backpack if I was to take it on travel. To give you an idea of size, let's do some comparisons against other popular handhelds. We'll start with their Air X model that came out last year. This one has a 5.5-inch display and is quite a bit smaller than the Pocket Max. Another 5.5-inch device is the recently released Retroid Pocket 6, which goes for around $230 starting price. Now, this one has a more powerful chipset, but has a much smaller screen. So if you're looking for something with a big screen experience, then I think that the Mangmi is going to win there. Moving up a little bit in larger screen sizes, here is the Odin 3 with a much more powerful processor. This one starts at around $330. Moving into 7-inch devices, here is the Nintendo Switch OLED, and you can see that this one is quite a bit smaller just because it doesn't have quite the same roomy controls. The AYANEO Pocket Evo is almost identical in size but has a more rounded shape to it. Next is the Odin 2 Portal, and this one is about the same size as well and a very similar shape. One more streaming center device is the Logitech G Cloud with that 7-inch display but much larger bezels, and it has that kind of teardrop shape to it as well. And then finally, just because I love to compare it against everything else, here is the Steam Deck OLED, which you can see is quite a bit bigger. My second impression of this handheld is that the ergonomics are a little bit weird, but they are something I got used to over time. So this has an all-glass front, as you can see, and it just kind of goes straight across on the front, and then it dips down right here, as you can see, at a 90-degree angle, and then angles back into these larger grips. And the grips here are quite chunky. As you can see, there's a lot of space for your whole hand, so I appreciate the fact that they are nice and big, but the positioning of them, because this is not a very tall device, makes it so that it is a little bit strange. When I see a big grip like this, then I expect to either be able to hold it along the sides like this, or to be able to center it in my palm and then just kind of grip the rest of it. But because of the positioning here and where you're going to rest your fingers, it's a little bit taller than that. So you can see that the grip is around here at the top of your palm. And so as you hold the device, it is pretty comfortable. I can put my index finger here, the other two down below, but it's the pinky that doesn't have a lot of leverage just because this device isn't super tall, and they also cut out this area right here as opposed to flaring it out. And so even though I am able to get used to the overall ergonomics to it, I feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity compared to other handhelds that we have seen before. I would say the AMOLED Pocket Evo is a more comfortable handheld, even though it has that similar flat ergonomics that tailor down on the sides. The thing about this one is that they do have these flared bottoms right here, and it's also more rounded so you can wrap your hands around it. So I would consider this to be a lot more comfortable. Same thing with the Logitech G Cloud, which has these flared bottoms to them and really nice big grips. And so I consider this to be one of the most comfortable handhelds ever made. And I would rather them have a shape like this as opposed to something that cuts away this whole part. It's pretty similar to the ergonomics of the Odin 2 Portal, which has that same kind of feeling where there's not a lot of space for the pinky and it doesn't go into the center of your palm. Instead, it goes to the top of the palm. And so in general, I found this one to not have a lot of good leverage either. Now, this company ended up selling a TPU grip for about $15, which added that additional leverage. And so this is actually living on my Odin 2 Portal all of the time. It makes it a little bit heavier, but this is a lot more comfortable to me. In fact, this is more comfortable than the AMOLED Pocket Evo, and it's a long shot more comfortable than the one that we're reviewing here today. Now, ergonomics are very subjective, and so I'm not saying this is an uncomfortable handheld, but it does feel for my medium-sized hands that it could be a little bit more comfortable. If I was the owner of this company, I would have asked them to not use an all-glass front like this. It probably drove up the cost, but then also it makes it a very flat experience without any sort of curved glass. And so I would rather this be a plastic handheld that has a little bit more of an ergonomic curve to it on the front, which I think would have given more leverage on the back. If I had to assign a number to it, I would give it a 7 out of 10 in terms of ergonomics. So basically a C in the American grading system. And I think that's about right. The main deal breaker for me with a larger handheld like this is whether or not I can comfortably play a first-person shooter game on it like Destiny 2. What I'm checking here is whether or not I can use the triggers and the thumbsticks at the same time while also feeling like I've got enough leverage to play that comfortably. And it definitely works here, but only barely so. The way I see it, if you do pick up this handheld, it might be something that you get used to over time. This is now my 3rd day straight of testing with this handheld, and I have found that it's a lot more comfortable today than it was in the previous days. So I myself am acclimating to it, and you might as well. And so those are my 2 main impressions when unboxing the Mangmi Pocket Max. It is rather large, it feels like a couch handheld, and the ergonomics are not perfect, but they do get the job done. Let's talk about the controls and the rest of the design as we go through. So we'll start with the analog sticks. These are full size, and then you can see that they have a metal band around the post as well, which gives them a very smooth feeling. You've got RGB lighting around them too. You can change this in settings or turn them off if you would like. The cap on these is very similar to other AYANEO products where it just kind of goes around in a circle. I've also seen this on GameCube controllers, and they feel pretty good, but I do like a bumpier texture myself. As far as the location of the sticks, I think they're great, and I also like the feel of a full-size stick like this, especially when doing game streaming. We'll talk about the D-pad and face buttons in a second, but before that, let's talk about the function buttons. So this is going to be back and home in the Android menu, and then this is select and start. It's a little bit weird to have to reach down here to press select and start. I would much rather have them up top, especially because we have a roomier device, but it looks like they were trying to keep it symmetrical. Let's talk about the D-pad first. It's a little bit complicated to talk about these because they are modular, but by default, it's going to come with a rubber membrane D-pad, which is what I'm using right here. So it's going to feel like a classic D-pad, and I think it's pretty good. Like, it's got a good amount of travel to it. It's got a nice pivot as well. The face buttons that come on it are also rubber membrane. They feel very good too. They've got a nice amount of travel to them, nice and tactile, and very quiet too. So these feel very good. I'm not sure what the price of these are going to be just yet, but they are selling these additional modular controls, a new D-pad and face buttons, and these are microswitch mechanical ones. The way I swap them out is pretty simple. I just grab on each end here with my fingernails and then just pull them out. And below that, you can see there's a magnetic pogo pin, and so it just snaps right into place. You can see there's a little notch right here, so you align that to the top and then just drop it in. So swapping these out is very simple, but I am a little bit concerned about just using pogo pins in general. I've seen a lot of reports from other laptops and other things that use this technology where they fail over time, and that would be a big bummer if you're not able to use your controls on your device. Obviously, time will tell when it comes to longevity, but I have found that I enjoy the rubber membrane ones more than the microswitches. The microswitch ones have that clicky feel to them. They are very precise, but I also find them to be very loud, both on the D-pad and the face buttons. Here's a quick audio sample between them, both with the face buttons and the D-pad. So the way I see it, the microswitch option is about twice as loud as the rubber membrane one. And so it really depends on what you prioritize. You want something that's very accurate and precise, or would you rather have something that's a little bit quieter? As far as D-pad input goes, I think they are both great in their own ways. So the rubber membrane one does a very good job with the contra test, where I press down the D-pad and rock it left and right. The character basically doesn't move at all. If I push it really far on one end or the other, I can make the character move, but in general, this is probably not going to get any accidental diagonals. The microswitches are a similar experience where it doesn't have any accidental diagonals either, but you can push it one way or the other, and you can get that force feedback of the click when you do push it to a diagonal. For Street Fighter style games, when I'm rolling the D-pad in one direction or the other, I did find that the rubber membrane one was a little bit less touchy than the one with microswitches. And so much in the way that it's hard to get an accidental diagonal when playing Contra, it's a little bit hard to pull off a deliberate diagonal with the Street Fighter style game. Now, after a few rounds, I got a little bit more used to it, and so I was playing a little bit better, but I did get some missed inputs here and there. Meanwhile, with the microswitch D-pad, I did feel like it was a bit more accurate, and that was because I was getting that tactile, clicky feedback every time. When it comes down to it, I do prefer the rubber membrane D-pad and face buttons. Not only are they much quieter, but I think that they are accurate enough as well. I would give these like a 9 out of 10, almost a 10 out of 10 for these face buttons. They are that good. As far as positioning, everything feels very good. The D-pad does not feel cramped when having to shift down to it, and then the face buttons do not conflict with the right analog stick as well, and so everything feels nice and roomy. Up top, we've got our fan exhaust and then our volume up and down and power. One complaint I have about this device is that these buttons are all right next to each other and they're the same shape, and so often I have tapped on this button on accident when trying to adjust the volume up and down. And so this is one thing I wish they could change, is maybe a different shape for the power button or put it in a different position. Let's talk about the shoulders and triggers. The shoulders are a little bit mushy but feel really good and responsive and are not loud. And then finally we have our triggers, which feel very good too. They are quite big, and so these feel good just in combination with the overall grip. On the bottom, we've got our USB-C port, which can do video out, our 3.5mm headphone jack, a micro SD card slot, which stays nice and shut, and then finally a microphone input. On the back, we've got our fan intake, and then 2 buttons that can be programmed in the software, and then finally we've got this weird metal strip on each side. I'm not really sure what this does other than aesthetics. Okay, let's talk about the display. I think it is excellent in most regards. I think it's got excellent coloring, and it's got deep blacks and, bright brights, and it can go all the way up to 800 nits. So I think in general, yeah, there's a lot to like about it. This thing gets so bright that I can play it in direct sunlight. So this is about at noon in Hawaii. So you're not going to get more sun than this right here. And I can still clearly see what's happening on the screen, even at an angle. Of note, you may see a black bar going across the display in this and in other footage, and it's not visible to the naked eye. It's a technology called PWM flickering. We'll talk about that in a moment. When it comes down to it, this screen goes toe-to-toe with a bunch of other OLED panels, as you can see right here. These are all at 100% brightness, and I think they all look great. Really nice saturated colors, and this is one of the brightest of the bunch. Now, you're probably not going to be playing it at 100% brightness all the time. In general, I found myself playing it around 50 to 60% brightness. Here are all the same handhelds, but at 50% brightness, and you can see that this one is not the brightest at this particular percentage, but it still does a very good job. It also gets very dim. This is at 0% brightness, and you can just barely see the words Game Boy right here. And so in general, this is going to be a wide-ranging screen. Now let's talk quickly about the PWM flickering thing. So this is present in most OLED panels. It's just a common technology, but it does give some people eye strain and headaches. Here I'm running my camera at a high frame rate and shutter speed, but only 1080p, so it looks a little bit grainy. But you can see that some of these have more pronounced black lines than others. And the general rule of thumb is the more that you see these black bars, the more it's going to affect people who are sensitive to PWM flickering. Here's another shot at 25% brightness, which is when PWM flickering will usually be the most prominent. You can see right here that yes, the Mangmi does have pretty significant black bars. It looks to be about on par with the Odin 2 Portal, but not as bad as the Odin 3. So again, it really depends on whether or not you're sensitive to this, but hopefully this will give you a good idea of whether or not this is going to be a good fit for you. One other thing I wanted to test was input delay with this particular screen because it goes up to 144 Hertz. So for this test, I use my phone at 240 frames per second, and I capture myself pushing the jump button and then counting the frames one by one when I slow it down. So to start, let's talk about what I set for the handheld. I put it in 144 Hertz refresh rate. I put it in balance mode, which is one of the middle performance modes. And then within RetroArch, I turned on 1 frame of run ahead, which is supposed to help input delay as well. From there, I'm using my phone camera at 1080p 240 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/480. I then counted 20 jumps and then took all of this information back, then counted it frame by frame and then made an average. And the results were kind of split between 13 and 14 frames from the moment I pressed down on the button to the moment that I saw Toad start to jump. That equals 54 to 58 milliseconds of delay, which is pretty good. A standard CRT television playing something like a Super Nintendo game will usually give you 50 milliseconds, so this is very close. In real time, this means that you can expect 3 or 4 in-game frames of delay, and that's pretty good. With a CRT console, you can usually expect somewhere between 1 and 3 frames of delay. So we are looking at something that's pretty close, not quite to the point of playing on a CRT, but it's not bad. And this is one of the benefits of having a high refresh rate screen is that it does help to reduce input latency, and adding a frame of run ahead helps in that way too. My only complaint about the screen is that it's not very consistent at 120 frames per second. For example, here playing in 120 Hz mode with the CRT Beam Simulator shader, I'm getting quite a bit of flickering. I've seen similar reports with the iNeo Pocket Evo, which has a hard time maintaining a very consistent frame rate, and that's exactly what I'm seeing here as well. Hopefully this is something that the company can fix in a future update, but as it stands right now, I wouldn't really want to play with a BFI or CRT Beam Simulator turned on. Next, let's talk about audio. I think it's pretty decent here. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we've got these roomier grips, which gives it more space for the sound to travel, and so I think this is above average. Okay, now let's talk a bit about the software. This is an Android-based device, so it's going to function like any other phone or tablet, but with the controllers attached to it, so a very simple setup altogether. Within these settings, we've got a handheld option, and so within here, it's very similar to other products like Retroid and AYN, so we can adjust things like our gamepad and calibrate our sticks, and then you can also go and change out your refresh rate and as well as your output options within here. You can also change the RGB lights around the sticks to be a different color or a different pattern, and then we've got a bunch of advanced and power saving options as well, very typical stuff from other handhelds. One nice feature under power saving is the auto shutdown, so if you leave your device on sleep for a certain amount of time, it'll just turn it off itself, and I think that's actually a pretty neat feature in case you forget about your handheld. Now beyond these settings, you can also swipe down from the top and you've got a couple other options here like adjusting your brightness as well as your internet functions, and you can also change out your button layout, and you can also have quick menu options for things like your ambient light around your sticks and your fan mode. If you tap on the sidebar option, it'll bring this up right here, which will allow you to adjust the performance profiles on the fly. We've got a bunch of different options. There's power saving, then balanced, and performance. And then there's also one called streaming and then turbo. In general, when it comes to lightweight stuff, I've been playing it in power saving mode. And then if I'm going to be playing something like PS2 or so, then I'll go into performance mode. And some heavy hitting games may require turbo. And then of course, if I'm streaming, I go into streaming mode. Each of these profiles have their own fan mode. So if we go into like streaming, it'll go to smart. If we go to turbo, it'll go to extreme. We'll talk more about fan noise and everything else in a moment. Below that, you can change out your refresh rate on the fly, and then you can also change things like your button layout too. So this is a really handy menu. It's a little bit weird that you have to go all the way down here and hit sidebar for it to show up in the first place. I feel like they could maybe have put a hotkey somewhere just to bring this up a little bit more quickly. As far as my own setup, I just installed all of my apps and then I use Emulation Station Desktop Edition as my front end. So this allows me to navigate through, choose my system, choose my game, and then launch it from there. And so this is my typical Android setup. I've got a whole setup guide for this. I'll leave it linked down below. It is worth noting they have their own game launcher app. And it's kind of neat, but I did not use this at all, but it still scanned all of my games. And so it actually found all of my games right here. I didn't scrape the box art or anything else like that, but it seems to be a pretty simple setup considering the fact that it shows all my games and I didn't do anything. All right, let's talk about benchmarks, and this is actually pretty excellent. So the top score I got here was 1499, but you can see here that it got a 99.5% stability in Wildlife Extreme Stress Test. This is going to push the device as hard as it can go for 20 minutes, and yeah, it stayed super stable the entire time. By comparison, the Retroid Pocket 5, which has the same chipset, only scored 1331 as its top score. So this one is actually outperforming the Retroid Pocket 5 in this particular GPU-based benchmark. Now, using a more powerful chipset like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 in the Odin 2 portal, you can see that this is over twice as powerful as the Mangmi Pocket Max, but still, for a Snapdragon 865, this is not a bad score. When doing a CPU-related benchmark, you can see that it is a bit closer between the two, but the Odin 2 portal is still much more performant. Now for this benchmark, I use the Turbo Performance mode, which has the Extreme Fan preset. And the interesting thing I found about that is that when running two different benchmarks, both in turbo mode, but one with the higher fan and one with a lower fan, the one with the lower fan got the higher score. So this one here is in turbo mode with the Extreme Fan. This one is with just the balanced fan instead. It is worth noting that the handheld got a little bit warmer around here when doing this test, but never to the point of being hot in any way. And so it's kind of interesting that I found this one to get the best performance overall. So what I've been doing is I go into here into the sidebar, I turn it into the turbo mode, and then I turn down the fan to balance mode after that. And that's a good thing because the Extreme Fan is quite loud. Let me give you a comparison between the two. We'll start with the Extreme Fan and then move over to the balanced one. So yes, when it comes to playing high-end stuff, I've been turning it on turbo, but then turning down the fan, and that's made it a much more palatable experience. I do find that the Extreme Fan is a little bit too loud for my tastes. Okay, let's jump into performance testing. Now, the Snapdragon 865 found in this device is a known commodity because the Retroid Pocket 5 has been out for about a year and a half at this point, but all the same, I did test it pretty thoroughly. We're going to switch things up and talk about streaming first, because I think this is the major focus of this handheld. For this setup, I'm using Apollo and Artemis. Apollo is running on my PC, and then Artemis is an app that is a Moonlight fork that allows me to stream from a PC to my app locally. I've got a whole setup guide for Apollo and Artemis. I'll leave it linked down below, but in general, I played everything at 1080p to match the resolution of this display, and I played the handheld at 144 Hz refresh rate to try to get the fastest rate possible. In the studio, I have the Google Nest Wi-Fi Pro. That's a 6E connection speed, so it is taking advantage of the Wi-Fi 6 that we have on this particular chipset. The nice thing about the Artemis app is that it allows you to go into the settings and turn on an experimental fast connection that is only available with Snapdragon chipsets, including the 865. And I found that with this setup, the average decoding time here was between 2.5 and 3.5 milliseconds. It's not the best I've ever seen on any handheld, but that is strikingly good for something around the $200 price point. To put it another way, this feels like I'm playing natively on the device. For me personally, anything under 4 megabits per second usually feels native, and this definitely felt that. And so personally, I think the number one thing that a streaming-focused handheld has to do is very good local PC streaming, and this one does really great. If you've got a beefy PC, but you don't want to sit in front of your desk to play computer games and you'd rather play on a handheld, then this actually looks like a pretty good fit. The fact that it's a 7-inch display and OLED and also HDR capable is pretty great. I was able to turn that on in the Windows settings as well via Apollo, and yes, I was able to play the games that supported it in HDR. So if you are looking for a PC streaming handheld, this one does nicely. Now, you're not just limited to cloud streaming. Another option I always like to try out is NVIDIA GeForce Now. I have one of the higher paid tiers, and this allows me to boost it up to 120 frames per second, and it feels great. Now, I'm playing this over the internet. I am also located in Hawaii, and so my ping is very bad, usually 60 or 70 milliseconds. So if you're closer to a server, then it's probably going to be a lot better. I just happen to be 2,000 miles away. All the same, it is still very impressive that I can play these games at 1080p in high or max settings and still get close to 120 frames per second depending on the game. One other streaming option I tried out is Xbox Cloud Gaming, so this is done via Google Chrome browser and then just navigating to the Xbox website. This one doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles, so I'm not sure what the actual frame rate is or the resolution or how fast the decoding time is, but I will say that among the three options, this one felt the most sluggish. So long story short, you've got a lot of options for streaming, and I found all of these worked pretty well, but my favorite was local PC streaming through Apollo and Artemis. One other streaming related note is that if you want to stream things like Netflix, this one only has wideband level 3. That means that it's only going to cap out at 480p resolution. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to play this at 1080p. Next, let's talk about local gaming as well as emulation. We'll start with Android games. I tried out a few here. It looks just fine. I like the fact that we've got a 7-inch display. That means games like Stardew Valley look very good. The Snapdragon 865 is not going to be your most performant chipset, so if you are looking for high-end Android gaming, then I would recommend something like the Odin 2 Portal, but this still does a pretty good job with lightweight and medium-weight Android games. If those games also support a 144Hz refresh rate, it's going to be buttery smooth. Moving on to emulation, let's start with the lightweight stuff, Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. All this is going to play absolutely fine. No issues here whatsoever. The biggest takeaway that I had from this is that OLED panel does make these games really pop. It is a 16:9 aspect ratio, which means that if you play something like 4:3, you're going to get those black bars on the left and right, but it is really nice to have this deep saturation when playing these games. You do have enough power to be able to play with some heavy-duty shaders, like right here with this arcade game, I'm playing with the CRT Geom Deluxe, and it's running absolutely fine. The Snapdragon 865 also does a really good job with 3D-based systems, so if we're talking about something like PlayStation, I'm running the DuckStation emulator right here, and I'm running it at a 3x resolution upscale or 720p, but then I also added a post-processing shader on top of it to give it a CRT look, and all of this is very demanding, but it's still running at full speed, no problem. Some games like Crash Team Racing also support widescreen hacks, so you can fill up the entire 16:9 display. Nintendo 64 runs absolutely fine on this chipset. You can upscale it to 1080p even within RetroArch, which is a bit more demanding, and it's still running at full speed. Same thing with Dreamcast. I can play this at a 1080p upscale with widescreen cheats turned on, and it looks brilliant, and it takes up the entire display. And playing these on a 7-inch screen is very impressive. The device also becomes a pretty decent mega PSP. You can play these games at a 4x resolution upscale or a 1080p resolution, and they're going to play absolutely fine here as well. The only system from this era that is going to present problems is Sega Saturn, which is a very hard system to emulate. Now, it really just comes down to the emulation core. You cannot really play the heavy-hitting games with the Beetle Saturn core. There's just not enough juice. Thankfully, you can use a more performant core like Yabasan Shiro, and the games will play at full speed. So Sega Saturn is available, but it's going to be a bit of a compromised experience when it comes to accuracy. Let's move up a couple generations to Gen 6 and talk about Nintendo GameCube first. So this is going to run absolutely fine like it did on the Retroid Pocket 5. There might be some games that will have a little bit of slowdown at the higher resolutions, but for the most part you can play all these games at a 3x resolution upscale. If the game supports widescreen hacks or it just has a widescreen option within the settings, you can do that too, and then fill out the entire display. But in general, yes, I would say by default, you could turn everything on GameCube to the Vulkan backend with a 3x resolution upscale. The only game I had to make some adjustments to was Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2, a notoriously hard game to play, so this one I had to drop down to the native resolution, and I would get some slowdowns here and there, but I would still consider this to be mostly playable. It's a similar story with Nintendo Wii. I just set this again to the Vulkan backend, 3x resolution upscale, and the vast majority of the games played absolutely fine. Again, this is all very similar to how it was on the Retroid Pocket 5, so this is more of a confirmation than anything. Let's move on to PlayStation 2. So by default, I play these at a 2.5x resolution upscale, which is again going to be 1080p, and then I turn on widescreen hacks and no interlacing patches, and generally these games will play at full speed. So my recommendation here would be to set it to a 2.5x resolution upscale and then see how it works here. And then if the game is having any sort of struggles, then I would turn it down to a 2x resolution scale, and then if that doesn't work, then 1.5 and so on. But much like with the Retroid Pocket 5, I think that the vast majority of PS2 games are going to be playable on here. Now, there were thousands of games in the PS2 catalog, and not every single one is going to play great, but the majority of them will. Some games like Jak 3 do have a couple slowdowns here and there, just a little bit, not to the point where I would say it's unplayable, but it's not a perfect emulation experience. A couple games will require you to make some additional adjustments. For example, with Gran Turismo 4, I found that my best results were when I went into the settings and turned the hardware download mode to disabled. This allowed me to play a bunch of different tracks at a 2.5x resolution upscale without any slowdown, so this was a great experience. With Need for Speed Most Wanted, I had to turn this one down to a 2x resolution upscale, and same thing here in hardware download mode, I disabled that, but after that it was running pretty well. So it really comes down to what you can tolerate and how demanding of a game you want to play. Something like Shadow of the Colossus can be played at a 2x resolution upscale, but it will get some slowdowns here and there. I would still consider this to be playable in general, but it really depends on how picky you are about your emulation. Suffice to say, I would say PS2 emulation here is pretty darn good, but not perfect. Let's move on to other systems. We'll talk about 3DS next. So this is Azahar running at a 4x resolution upscale, and these games are running just fine. Again, compatibility might prevent some of these games from playing at full speed, but the games that I tested ran great. Moving up to Wii U, this one allows you to run custom turnip drivers, so I'm using the Mr. Purple T19 turnip drivers for this, and it's running absolutely fine, both with lightweight games and those that are a little bit harder to run, like Wind Waker HD. For Wind Waker as well as Twilight Princess, I had to go into the graphics pack and reduce the resolution from 1080p down to 720p, and then I also had to play this in turbo mode, but at that point it was running at a stable 30 frames per second, which is what this game ran at natively. So these two Zelda games I think are going to play just fine, but Breath of the Wild is probably not going to be playable on this particular chipset. But either way, I think that a good amount of the Wii U catalog is going to be pretty good here as long as it's compatible. Moving on from there, let's talk about Nintendo Switch, and much like with the Retroid Pocket 5, my recommendation here would be to mostly play lightweight games. I'm using that same Turnip T19 driver, and it's working absolutely fine here. For the most part, I would recommend sticking to 2D games. These are usually going to give you the best bang for your buck. You might be able to try some 3D-based systems, but I think that if Nintendo Switch is your priority, then I would get something with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, just because compatibility is going to be better, and it's also going to run at a faster frame rate. All these games are also running in handheld mode, which means they're going to play at a 720p resolution, so it's not the best experience overall when it comes to Switch emulation. For that, I would play with a higher-end handheld. And then finally, I also did a little bit of PC gaming as well using the GameNative app, and the Snapdragon 865 does a pretty good job with lightweight titles, but I would stick to only these with this particular chipset. I would say the experience here is a lot like Nintendo Switch. If your priority is to play PC games, then I think that a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 or more powerful processor is going to be a better fit. All the same, it is a nice perk to be able to play some lightweight PC games locally on your handheld. Okay, that's it for testing. Let's go ahead and start wrapping up and talk about what I like and what I don't like about the Mangmi Pocket Max. There are quite a few things that I do like about it. Number one are these great buttons. The face buttons in particular, the rubber membrane version, are some of the best that I've found in a larger handheld. They're accurate and tactile and very quiet compared to the competition, so kudos to the company for the buttons in general. You have the ability to also swap them out for micro switches, but I've personally found that the rubber membrane ones are the best fit for me. I also like the large analog sticks here. They feel full-sized and they have a nice range of motion to them and they feel ultra smooth. In general, I would say this handheld is pretty comfortable. It's been a pleasure to use over the past few days, but not the most ergonomic handheld I've ever had. I also think it's a beautiful AMOLED display. It's 7 inches, 144 Hz with nice saturated colors and very deep blacks. My only complaint about the screen is that it is not very consistent. It's staying at 120 Hz, which does affect things like black frame insertion. The Snapdragon 865 has got some decent performance under the hood. You can play the vast majority of PS2 and GameCube titles at an upscaled resolution. But I think where this handheld really shines is as a big screen streaming device. The controls and the screen all come together very nicely to be able to play local game streaming in around 2.5 or 3.5 milliseconds of decoding time. When you combine that with that 8,000 milliamp hour battery, this is a device that you can stream all day long. Now that being said, it's not perfect, so let's talk about some of the things I don't like about it. Number one is that it feels like it lacks a little bit of grip in terms of ergonomics. It's still overall a comfortable handheld to hold, but I feel like it's a missed opportunity when it comes to just overall leverage. I feel like it could have been better designed. If you're trying to get the best performance, by default, the turbo mode has a very loud fan, but thankfully, if you turn it down, you'll actually get a little bit better performance and it won't be quite as loud. I also have some longevity concerns when it comes to those pogo pins. In general, we've seen that other devices that use this same technology will often have disconnection issues, and that would be a shame with this particular handheld. And then finally, even though I do think that the $200 early bird price is decent, it's not an amazing deal compared to the previous model, which came out well under $100. I think that for everything that we're getting here, really nice controls, a decent processor, and a beautiful display, the $200 is justified. After all, the Retroid Pocket 5, which has the same chipset, but with a smaller screen, is the same price as well. So I think it's decent when it comes to that. At the same time, their previous product was a very disruptive price point, and I was hoping for the same with the Mangmi Pocket Max. It's still an excellent handheld, and I would say it's well worth around $200, but once it starts getting out of the early bird pricing and goes up to $240, that becomes a bit of a worse deal. So in the end, I think this is a good handheld, and it does very well if you want something with a big screen for streaming. In particular, this is probably the main use case I'm going to use for this going forward. So it really comes down to what you're looking for. If you're looking for bang for your buck in terms of emulation, then I think that the Retroid Pocket 6 at $230 with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is the better deal between them if you're specifically looking for performance at that level and you don't mind something smaller. But if you want something larger and the ability to stream games really nicely, then this is going to do the trick. Now things are a little bit more complicated when we look at the pricing of the Odin 2 Portal, at least as of making this video, because they're having a sale where it's $250 for this handheld, which I think is a no-brainer if you're looking for a big handheld with a lot of power at the same time. When you put it all together, the Mangmi Pocket Max is a good handheld. For around $200, getting something that has an OLED display with a high refresh rate and excellent controls for streaming is going to be a pretty good deal compared to the other competition. After all, this thing blows the Logitech G Cloud out of the water, and it's still $100 cheaper. Like with a lot of these other devices at this similar price point, it really comes down to dialing in what you're looking for a handheld. If you want something with some decent performance and a beautiful screen, and your budget is capped out at around $200 plus shipping, then yes, I would say that the Mangmi Pocket Max is a good choice. At the same time, we are spoiled for choice when it comes to handhelds within the $200 to $400 price point. It really comes down to whether or not you want something more compact, something with extreme performance power, and so on. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.